He is risen. He is risen indeed. These are words that are liturgically said on Easter Sunday around the globe. Sometimes this can be said in a chant-like manner without our engagement in the statement we are saying. We can fall into the trap of just completing the statement without thinking about what we are saying. In this short greeting, we are proclaiming resurrection. We are announcing something that goes beyond the natural rule of life that we know and experience day in and day out. Yet we announce it, hopefully, in our secure faith that Jesus rose again from the dead that first Easter morning. This one statement can have a huge effect and power on each of us. Our Bible reading for today, which tells of the first Easter morning, is taken from the perspective of John. We read of Mary Magdalene going to the tomb to find the stone moved and the tomb open. When Mary and the other unnamed women saw this, she jumped to the conclusion that a grave robber came and stole Jesus' body. This was the news she shared with Peter and the other disciple, traditionally thought to be John, in verse 2. The idea of resurrection was so far from her mind that the only logical conclusion was that someone broke into the tomb and moved the body of Jesus. I'm not sure about you, but if I were in Mary's shoes on that day, I probably would have come to the same conclusion. Even though she would have seen Jesus defy death by raising Lazarus a little time previously, in that moment, I wouldn't think that there would be the possibility of Jesus raising himself from the dead. We have the blessing of hindsight when looking back at passages like this. We can read knowing the end of the story, and this can lead us to miss the emotion of those in the thick of the action. Mary would have been distraught that she couldn't grieve Jesus' body as it was no longer where it was left. I wonder what emotions we would be facing if we were in this narrative ourselves. When Peter and John hear Mary's findings and conclusion of theft, they immediately run to see for themselves. If the body was stolen, as Mary thought, then they needed to know it had happened by seeing it for themselves. Peter and John arrive at the tomb, and we get a detailed description of where the body should have been. We read that the cloth covering Jesus' face was separate to the other cloths. This detail shows that the body couldn't have been stolen, as who steals a body and leaves the clothing behind neatly folded? Whatever happened was orderly and unhurried. The mystery thickens. Jesus' body is gone, and the evidence of the scene suggests the body wasn't stolen. It is in this moment when a light bulb pings in the mind of John. He saw and believed. Many commentators debate about whether this was a belief in resurrection or was more about the door being opened for belief in the resurrection of Jesus, which he builds on as he visits them post-resurrection. Whatever it was, something happened within John to open his thinking beyond what seemed logical to something beyond how we know life now. This was a moment where John began to see things in a different way. This would have been shaped and grown by a continued experience of the risen Jesus, and then the Holy Spirit post-Pentecost. Have you ever had a moment in your life where you have looked at what was going on and thought, there must be more than this? I think that must have been what was going through John's mind in this moment. He wasn't sure what, but the evidence in front of him led him to expand his thinking beyond his known experience in this moment. In our passage from John today, we don't encounter the risen Jesus in person, but we are left with the evidence found by Mary, Peter, and John. If you read on in John's Gospel, we can read of what happened when Jesus appears to his friends after the resurrection. However, I think it is an important choice made by John to not have the risen Jesus in the initial narrative of the discovery of the empty tomb. We are left with the evidence found by Mary, Peter, and John. We are left with the knowledge that John began thinking there must be more. We are left with the knowledge that after all they found, they went home. I believe John tells this story so it can ask the question of our understanding and belief of the scene discovered that day. In the place of confusion, we have a choice of looking at what is in front of us and not looking beyond, or asking the question of, there must be more. As I have already mentioned, Jesus did then appear to Mary and his followers and taught them about the specifics of resurrection. This understanding then led them to have a story to tell everyone they could find. Our second Bible reading from 1 Corinthians chapter 15 shows Paul telling of the importance of the resurrection for believers. The church in Corinth had the problem of people saying that there was no resurrection for humanity, even though the teachers believed in the resurrection of Jesus. Paul challenges this thought by suggesting that if resurrection was not possible for humans, then Jesus couldn't have been resurrected. The fact that Jesus rose again from the dead shows that a new way of life, different to what we know on earth, is possible. Something that is more than life as we know it. Paul goes on to suggest that this Jesus didn't rise again, then the whole of the Christian belief crumbles. If Jesus didn't rise again, we wouldn't have new life. If Jesus didn't rise again, we cannot be forgiven. If Jesus didn't rise again, all we do is useless. For Paul, Jesus' resurrection was the foundation of all he did and believed, and the same is true for us today. We see the scene from John, and we are faced with a question of whether we would wonder if something more is possible than the image of death found in the tomb. In the resurrection of Jesus, which is real and vibrant, there is life found beyond death. This might not be the most logical conclusion in earthly wisdom, but if it were, where would the need for faith be? With Paul, we see that if we move away from the reality of Jesus' resurrection, everything crumbles and is a waste of time. The something more found in the resurrection is a foundation of eternal proportion. On the bedrock of Jesus' risen life, we can build a life of love and hope that can never be destroyed. The question from Easter Sunday is, what do you believe? Do you accept the evidence that there is something more than what meets the eye in the resurrection of Jesus? Do you know that this resurrection is the foundation of a hope and love that will endure any and all circumstances? Take a moment to think about your responses to these questions. You may want to read the Bible readings again or other passages that come to mind. Take a moment to ask yourself if you're wanting to find the something more a life with the resurrected Jesus can bring. To return to the statement we began with, he is risen indeed, a belief in the resurrection that is the bedrock of all we believe and do. To just pay an unengaged lip service to it is not enough. Next time we have the opportunity to declare resurrection, let's do it thoughtfully and allow God to bring about kingdom transformation within and through us as a result. Let's choose to remain in the victory and life of Jesus' resurrection today and always, because he is risen indeed.